Now, the deadline debacle has possibly come to an end. America just barely avoiding default and agreeing to raise the debt ceiling at the last minute so the U.S. can keep borrowing beyond its almost $17 trillion in debt. Well, 16 days of a government shutdown halted the capital to a standstill, put hundreds of thousands of workers out of jobs, and the world economy on the verge of recession. This deal would reopen the government and fund it until January 15th, allowing it to continue borrowing until February the 7th. So really, it's just a temporary fix. Well, to discuss this, joining me are Gerald Celente, publisher of the TrendsJournal, and Curtis Ellis, executive director of American Jobs Alliance. In London, we have Mr. Keith Boyfield, a researcher for the Center for Policy Studies. And here in Washington with me is Neil McCabe, senior reporter at Human Events. Thank you all very much for joining me. I want to begin with you, Neil. Is this good news?
Well, it's terrible news for Americans and for conservatives. It's good news for those people who believe that the Obamacare and the federal government should continue to grow and that the government should take an increasingly more powerful role in our lives. It's really a horrific defeat for conservatives who trusted Republican leaders.
So you see this as the Republicans giving in?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to Gerald Celente. What do you think of this? Yesterday, I read one of your tweets where you talked about the debt default and what it means in terms of the U.S. public being off the radar, not speaking about it in bars and such. Why is that so? And what do you think of this news?
Well, as far as on the political end, I'm a political atheist, so I don't look at it as who it helped or who it hurt. The American public, by and large, has no idea about the debt ceiling or default. You know, they're more interested in the sports at this point. So among the general public, that fear and hysteria coming out from Washington didn't really trickle down. However, when you really look at the world news and you hear what they're saying, whether it's coming from the World Bank, whether the IMF, whether the leading bankers of the world, or from China with now its de-Americanization, this was really a spectacle following a series of spectacles that has downgraded America's image worldwide to levels I've never seen so low.
Do you agree with that in London, Mr. Keith Boyfield? Is the world now going to remember this? Harry Reid this morning saying that an historic bipartisan agreement has been. So he's looking at it as a different way. The rest of the world, how are they going to see this? Is this going to be a lesson?
Well, for those of us living outside America, it's a wake-up call, I think, particularly for investors. You've got to remember that the Chinese hold $1.3 trillion worth of US Treasury bonds. I think a lot of Chinese didn't quite appreciate that. You're going to see, as a result of this latest piece of political theatre, a move to review the way in which a lot of countries hold their assets worldwide. 60% of all foreign currency exchange reserves are currently held in US dollars. I think there's going to be an increasing move to drop the dollar in pursuit of safer currencies. And you're going to see, for example, increased investment in places like London in the residential and commercial sector because it's seen as a hedge against uncertainty, and markets hate uncertainty. That's what we're getting as a result of this latest political drama in Washington.
Mr. Curtis Ellis, Executive Director of American Jobs Alliance. Obviously, a lot of the American economy has already been affected by this shutdown. It's day 16 now. What do you make of the news, first of all? And second of all, what has America learned from this? Are we not going to see this problem addressed once again down the road? Essentially, the government has agreed to just push it further down the line, no?
That's exactly right. Now, one of the lessons and one of the prime considerations in political communications is that you repeat, and repeat the message again and again and again. Now, if you believe the polls, the Republicans have taken quite a beating on this mayhem and political theater. Now, what we're going to get to do is remind voters again of just how disorganized this whole crowd in Washington is. come January or February or whenever we get to revisit the debt ceiling and shutdown stuff. So I don't think it's going to help them much.
You know, how are Republicans? How are the Republicans going to pay for this? I mean, they are being blamed for this shutdown.
Well, first of all, I think I don't have a problem with democracy in action and the way the American system is sort of allowed to work its will.
So you're okay with the fact that the government did work for 16
this so-called,
days?
it did work.
How so? 800,000 people weren't working.
The framers established, competing institutions, co-equal branches. It's not a dictatorship. It's not a monarchy. And so people in other parts of the world probably aren't used to the fact that the head of state just can't dictate what the rest of the country does. Republicans are going to be hurt because conservatives gave Republicans the majority in the House. John Boehner has his gavel because of the Tea Party and because of conservatives. And if he betrays them, he loses. Doesn't America have responsibility
as such an economy to not allow it to go this far, to get to default where it would, and you heard from the rest of our guests.
I hate to interrupt you, but there was going to be no default.
Either way.
There was going to be no default. Treasury officials communicated to Congress last week that they are working on plans to pay the debts as they come. The federal government receives $250 billion in revenues every month. There was going to be no default. This was just scary talk. I just want to get a reaction
to that from some of our other guests. Anyone who would like, please do jump in. Neil McCabe here saying that there wasn't going to be default.
Yeah. I'm not quite on this. Whilst I'm all for congressional accountability, I'm not quite sure what the Republicans got out of this campaign because, for example, on Obamacare, which the Republicans are very skeptical about, one of the things that they were trying to do was to actually curb the benefits given to members of Congress and their staff. And as I understand it, as part of this Senate deal, there's been absolutely nothing agreed on that. I'm not quite sure what the Republicans have got out of this last 2 weeks, apart from a diminution in their poll ratings.
Well, I'd like to add to that and say that this is not democracy at work. This was watching the incompetence and the inepts, a gang of Republicans and Democrats, 535 people, making decisions for 315 million people, and you can say with all your confidence that there wasn't going to be a default. You should have said that to Lagarde. You should have said that to the World Bank. You should have said that to Jamie Dimon and so many others who feared that.
No, dude. That's from the Treasury. The Treasury.
You should have said it to Fitch Ratings because you're going to find the U.S. government's credit rating reduced.
Let me finish. I didn't interrupt anyone when they were speaking. Don't interrupt me.
Gerald, go ahead and finish what you were saying.
What I'm saying is that this is just another level of incompetence. Whether it's going to war against Syria, whether it's starting wars in Iraq or Afghanistan, whether it's the war on drugs, whether it's sequestration, whether it's going over the physical cliff, you have a bunch of incompetent and inept people hiding behind this barrier that we are congressmen and senators and everything is under control. The whole world is laughing at America.
Can I echo?
I would make the observation in a survey that just published in the last week. It said that 39% of Americans didn't think that this was going to have any effect on their economic reputation. I think they're going to be in for a big surprise, particularly when the credit rating agencies start to review the U.S. government credit. I think it's going to lead to far greater uncertainty, and it's going to lead to a diminution in the strength of the dollar. So basically, Americans are going to be poorer.
Most Americans are paying more attention to the football scores than to the diminution of credit ratings on the world market. But what they see coming out of Washington is a clown show by everybody. So
you try borrowing some money then in future with your credit ratings having been damaged.
Gentlemen, that don't go to work every day.
I just want to hear what Mr. McCabe has to say about Republicans. And I get this idea that you're kind of saying, well, it doesn't really matter what the rest of the world thinks. Am I correct in that? That you're upset because Republicans gave in, but it does matter what the rest of the world thinks.
Well, listen,
I mean, the rest of the world economy
we'll
could have
see
been
what
thrust back
happens.
into recession. That's a big deal. Worse than 2008.
There can be talk and speculation, but my guess is that when the Treasury has its next auction, people will still line up to buy treasuries. People will still want to do business in the United States. People will still be using the dollar. Immigrants will still want to come here. People will still want to buy our goods. And all this scary talk was just scary talk. The fact of the matter is that the federal government has $17 trillion of debt, and this Obamacare is a train wreck. And I didn't say train wreck. The man who designed Obamacare said it's a train wreck, and people stood up to stop it. There are forces who make money off of this debt. There are forces who live off of government spending, and there are people who are vested both financially and politically in Obamacare who rose up to stop it. I'm not happy with the result, but I'm glad this battle was had.
I just want to go to Curtis Ellis in New York and ask you if you think the
Obamacare is very well established. It's been agreed by the Supreme Court, and as far as I can see, the Republicans have actually made no impact whatsoever on this Obamacare legislation. So the whole thing has been entirely
ridiculous, sir.
Negative.
That's an ignorant statement, sir, because the Supreme Court does not make it settled law.
I want to stay focused on today's news and the Republicans, who obviously, a majority of them, at least in the Senate, we can report now, have seen that any kind of default, even if you just call it scary talk, would have been devastating, and perhaps that's why they gave in.
I think that there's always been a split, or at least since World War II, there's been a split in the Republican Party between conservatives and Republicans, and this is what's playing out. Well, that's wonderful, but the fact remains that people are going to do business with the United States.
I think a lot of people might disagree with you. Gerald Celente, what do you have to say to that? How many times can this happen before the world says that's enough?
I think we're going to be buying more Chinese goods.
Can I answer the question that was asked me? I just want to hear from Gerald. Right. Here's what Harry Reid said. The compromise we reach will provide our economy with the stability it desperately needs. It set the country on a path to fiscal sustainability. It has done no such thing. We also have the tapering issue in front of us. Interest rates are set to rise, and when they go up, the economy goes down. All of that has been shown in Washington is the complete ineptness and incapability of both parties to effectively run a government. To take the nation to the 11th hour and the world at this level is the height of irresponsibility, and it shows in the polls. What is it? Some 80% of the people have lost faith in Congress? The sad factor is we have no choice. It's what John Adams warned us about and the other founding fathers, not to have two major parties control the country, because it's no different than the Bloods of the Crips, the Bananas of the Gambinos, or the Democrats of the Republicans. They're gangs. They dress differently and talk differently, but in the end, it's murder, pillage, and rape. We have seen China open up its currency market in London. London is going to become London has become a subsidiary of the Chinese central bank. They're taking steps to trade their currency. We're seeing move by move a move away from the dollar as the reserve currency. And the corporate financial elites on a global scale are more than happy to push America aside. So the more uncertainty we have, like we just saw, it's only going to accelerate the process. Through moves like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, setting up global governance structures.
Certainly going to have an influence on where people hold their assets.
And the clown show we're seeing in Congress is only accelerating the process. The only problem to all of that is there is no other reserve currencies. That's the problem, because the Chinese have their problems too. You know, they're pumping money into their system to keeping it going. You're seeing what's going on in the Eurozone. So again, I'm not taking a stand on this. I'm merely saying that the United States is still in a better position than the rest of them
because we still are the reserve currencies. And China's exports were down 3.6% this last quarter, the last month. You also see 7% decline in Taiwan, of 1.5% decline in Korea. You're seeing declines around the world, so there aren't a lot of options. So China, although they're going into other markets, they're still cornered because, as was pointed out, they're holding $1.5 trillion of U.S. debt.
Now, effectively, if this deal goes through, I want to ask you all a question. If this deal goes through, effectively, the U.S. government will continue to discuss a possible long-term solution to this budget. I just want to go through to all four of you quickly as we wrap up here and ask what you think is next. Is this going to be another 3 months of partisan wrangling? Are we going to see a solution, or are we just going to see another shutdown the next time the deadline comes? Let's start with you in the studio, Neil, and move on to all our guests.
I think what we're going to see is this may be the last attempt that conservatives try to cut spending and the debt through the Republican Party. What people are really saying now is that, you know, for the last 60 years, conservatives have found a home in the Republican Party, and maybe the Republicans don't want them there. And so this civil war inside the Republican Party will continue, but the American people want the debt cut, and the American people don't like Obamacare, and that's what the conservatives were trying to do.
All right, Gerald Celente, what's next?
More of the same, but worse. The incompetence and the ineptness. We may get diverted by another issue. Like, hey, look how quickly they went to war, wanted to go to war with Syria. They could do that like that. So we may get diverted when the next crisis comes, a geopolitical issue, but it'll be more of the same, but worse.
All right, Curtis Ellis, what do you think? What can we expect on this issue? Will we see a solution to the budget?
Well, we will be 3 months closer to the midterm elections, and the Republican Party leadership are going to have to think, do they want to remind the American people again of just how disorganized the whole situation in Washington is when you have Congress with an 80% disapproval rating? I don't think we're going to see a solution to the budget, the long-term budget problems. We haven't been able to come up with that solution for 2 years. We're not going to get it in 3 months.
Exactly.
Okay, and Keith Boyfield in London, I want to ask you a more global question.
Can I just add something? I think
how are we going to see the world?
Okay.
Go ahead.
How are we going to see the world do what?
React to this near default. How are we going to see the world react to this near default?
Oh, I see. I think that they're going to be increasingly looking to other currencies, and I think there will probably be an increase in the price of gold, the traditional hedge against uncertainty. And I think that you're going to see countries and investors increasingly invest in other places besides the US because they think it's a safer, more certain bet. So as I was saying earlier on, you're seeing a surge of investment into residential and commercial space here in London. It's a boom town at the moment. And I think you're going to be seeing the same thing in other parts of the world. Switzerland is one obvious
example. I'm going to have to cut you off there. It was a pleasure to speak to all of you. Very different opinions, very heated debate. We're going to continue to keep our eye on the situation in the Capitol. For now, I'm Anisa Nawe in Washington.